We'd like to welcome everybody. We have attendees that are here from over 50 countries. And just to remind everyone that this webinar, as with the one in the morning, will be recorded. And if you have questions during the webinar, please put them in the question box. And we will be asking the questions of our presenters and directing the questions for the technical team from Qantas EA and questions for the IUCN and UNEP teams as well. We have 3 topics that we're going to cover today. We're going to do an introduction to the guidance and how it works. We're going to cover a section on regional results, one region or one country from Asia and one country from Africa. We will also cover a bit on the policy aspects of the guidance and this work, and some of the business aspects of the guidance. And we appreciate that everyone has joined us, and we can actually start now. So I would like to introduce to you our panelists for the day. We have from the UN Environment Team, we have Mr. Feng Wang and Ms. Ran Xi. And from IUCN, we have Janica da Silva, Juan Manuel Sabio Mortiu, Gerard Boss, Maeve Nightingale, and Peter Manyara is joining us in just a second. From the Qantas EA team, we have Julien Boucher and Violaine Migaud is from Qantas, Paula Peruta, and Alex Boucher. Thank you all for your time today. As I mentioned earlier, the webinar will be in 3 parts about the guidance, sharing results from Africa and Asia, and the 3rd part will be on policy and business. With that, I would like to start with about the guidance, and this part will be presented by Mr. Feng Wang and Mr. Janica da Silva. Over to you guys.
So I will give a very short look back of the history of this project and the reason why we're doing that. And then I will hand over to colleagues to give you more details. So actually this project or the work dated back around 2.5 years ago, when UNEP was thinking how do we better support our member states and countries to understand on the plastic pollution, both on the status but also the cause of it. So at that time there were not so many, let's say, tools or methodology to measure and understand better the plastic value chain and also the source of the problem. Especially we haven't seen a kind of harmonized methodology for making the calculation and doing the assessment. So this was the original idea to develop this guidance to support country to better measure their plastic pollution and also develop solution. Luckily, we were able to formulate a very strong partnership with IUCN to implement this idea with the support from a couple of key donors. Lynn, maybe you can go to the next slide. So today we are very excited to share the result with you after 2 years of development. Essentially, the goal of our intervention is to develop a harmonized methodology framework to support countries and also cities to understand better the key hotspot related to plastic pollution, and also based on the assessment of hotspots, how can we support different stakeholders and also the government to define interventions, and also what are the concrete instruments we can apply actually to deal with the pollution. As you can see that from the very beginning that our goal was to support government to develop policy in the intervention as well as action from the private sector, so that we wanted to develop something that's very practical and also can be applied by countries and for supporting the decision-making process. So there are 3 key, let's say, products of our guidance. One, the blue publication you might have seen is a high-level comprehensive methodology introduction of the key components and also the way how we're dealing with this problem. There are also a set of modules presented in PowerPoint showing the concrete calculation steps and also formulas and also detailed modeling approaches. Most importantly, we also develop a set of tools that's comprised of different Excel database or Excel sheet to facilitate data collection, assessment, and also generating results. So we're happy to announce today that all the three different type of output from the project have been finally published on our website, and please click on the link. We'll be also sharing in the chat box for the product. I would like to spend a very short time to explain what do we mean by hotspot, as there is no common definition agreement on that. But our understanding of hotspot is either the product, polymer, or the process, or even the location causing the plastic leakage and also associated impact, so that we can understand where are the key areas we can act upon to mitigate the impact. So this is what we mean here by hotspot. This graph simply shows in the kind of a very visual way in terms of hotspots, what we mean is actually the source of the problem, mainly caused by the production and consumption of plastic products by product categories, polymers, or different application in different sectors. At the same time, the system that in the country or in the city that dealing with the plastic product waste and pollution. At the same time, what are the actual impact to the environment and human health? So in this way that we are able to map the whole system throughout the life cycle of the plastic product and also find out the key areas of intervention. So this is a little bit background on the way how we measure things. And as I said, that the guidance is not only a theoretical report or methodology, it is actually being applied in many countries so that we can also get a fresh learning experience by using that. So having said that, now I think it's perfect timing for me to hand over to my colleague Jenica in IUCN, who has applied the guidance in a couple of countries with very good results. So that I think it's now a good bridge for Jenica to step up to tell us more about the pilot that IUCN has been organizing. Thank you.
Thank you, Fan, for that introduction. What I would like to stress, IUCN's Close the Plastic Tap was started around 2014. And one of the things we've recognized in identifying solutions is that there is a need for harmonized methods for addressing plastic waste and leakage. And this is really where our collaboration with UNEP and QuantiCA really stems from. The value in particular of the guidance and its current structure comes from actually some early work that IUCN had done with QuantiCA in the initial phases. So this we saw as a natural progressive evolution of what had started many years ago. More specifically, as it relates to the guidance, I think what IUCN has been able to bring to the table is a set of experiences in applying it. And by applying the guidance, we've actually learned and been able to adapt and modify it to meet the needs of what we see as a vast group of stakeholders. And to give you a very simple idea, this product has been tested in 3 continents, 6 countries, and 1 sub-region, ranging from one end, South Africa and Thailand, which are considered very relatively well-developed economies, to the other end of the spectrum. So the experiences that we've gathered actually, I think, have enriched the product as you currently see it, and we anticipate with further testing this will improve even further. A second factor that comes out of our testing is really the approach of applying the hotspot analysis. And we've actually had the opportunity of actually using what I would say are 3 different mechanisms for dealing or applying it. One, in a situation where it was pretty much applied as a first basis of a quick analysis. 2, applied in conjunction with partners with a less hands-off approach. And thirdly, which I will show you in this current slide, is through our marine plastics and coastal communities project in a more holistic way. And I think this is what we might say is the very valuable tool. the basis of this is really through setting up multi-stakeholder platforms that bring together different stakeholders to buy into this information right from the point of which when it's produced, analyzed, and then into the decision-making process. So the knowledge and information that comes out of the generation of the hotspot analysis is really critical and important to influence these other components. And those three other components that we've been working on relate to three main areas. First, obviously, in terms of informing national policy and actions in terms of areas of interventions that make sense. And particularly, as you will hear later on from Julian and his team, there's a whole component that helps identify potential instruments and interventions that can actually inform that decision-making process. But it is also coupled with more detailed information, as you'll hear from the case studies later on from Thailand, Vietnam, and our policy components, which actually brings together the legal and policy analysis to complement this work. So it's a part of a larger package. Also included in that component is really making the economic case for action. Because ultimately, while you can identify these issues, you can see how to solve the problem, it has to make economic sense for it to be actually implemented. So coupled with all of this information, we think that this is an approach to actually deal with the larger issues of addressing plastic leakage and waste. More importantly, it's also important to make sure that we engage with all our different stakeholders, and particularly the private sector or businesses, as you will hear later on, are extremely important in terms of using this information to make decisions and to be engaged in taking actions. And then finally, what is extremely important, and I think our first session this morning highlighted quite clearly, is that there is a need to build capacity and methods to be harmonized. And so capacity development is an extremely important component of all of this work. And that works in a number of different ways. One, in terms of actually embedding this methodology among stakeholders and integrating it into national systems, but also engaging with different parts of stakeholders, particularly communities and locally based organizations that quite often are doing substantial work in addressing the issues of plastic waste and leakage, but are not often recognized for their role in terms of what it is in terms of the circular economy. So to very succinctly put, and I hope some of this will come out later on when we discuss the case studies that we have, we see this as part of an overall package that can be used at a national level, at its level. But that does not preclude one from actually applying it in a more restricted form, either as a baseline startup or some intermediary process. And this, I think, is the value and utility of this methodology that can be applied. Finally, just to very quickly say is that as we've applied the methodology and learned through this whole process, we've had a large number of spin-off outcomes. And these have related to actually contributing and taking action on specific actions, as you'll hear later on, in terms of, for example, supporting at least 2 of the countries to engage in discussions around extended producer responsibility. And more importantly, what has also happened out of this process is the sharing of information and data amongst other projects at different scales and levels. And this has already happened in 3 different countries on 3 different projects. So we see this integrated process really as the way forward in actually ensuring that A, we have a harmonized methodology, and B, that we actually involve all the relevant stakeholders in the decision and process of getting comfortable and using this information. So with that very brief overview of how we have at IUCN applied this product and tool, I would like to hand it over to Julian, maybe just now start giving you a little bit more of what you actually get when you use it, and then later on. So with that, maybe I'll pass it on to Julian. Thank you.
Thank you, Janaka. Hello, everyone. So my name is Julien Boucher. I am the founder and director of EA, Environmental Action. We are a research consultancy based in Switzerland, and together with Quantis, we have been doing most of the technical work of developing and piloting the guidance for UNEP and IUCN. And my presentation now will try to give you a sense of what you get when applying this guidance. The next slide. So first thing you get is a baseline. And what we mean by that is an assessment of the magnitude of the main plastic flows in your country, an assessment of what are the key waste management metrics in your country, and of course, what is the magnitude of the plastic leakage in your country. So this baseline is based on modeling to reconcile very many different data from many sources, often conflicting data. As an example of output, you can see on the graph here the plastic mass balance for one country. In the input, you have the domestic plastic production, the import of primary plastics, the import of products containing plastic, and the import of waste or plastic waste. As output, you have export of plastic waste in some cases, export of products, sometimes export of primary plastics, and a change in stock when you have long-lasting products that accumulate in the country. The rest is waste with different types of management, some being mismanaged and eventually leaked in the environment and the ocean. So this coherent and standardized mass balance approach, coupled with modeling of the waste management, allows for benchmarking between countries and also benchmarking over time for your own country in order to monitor progress. The next slide. In this baseline, we also have different focuses. One of them is the recycling situation in the country. And the guidance provides a framework to include imports and export of plastic, as well as the contribution of the formal and the informal sector in making the recycling picture. In this example, you can see that the recycling rate in the country is 13% in average, but this is mainly stemming from imported plastics. If you look at the recycling of domestically wasted plastic, it's only 1%. And this is typically the type of information or information gap that you want to have in mind when, as a company or as a country, you want to calculate on or mitigate your plastic footprint, for example. Next slide. So another focus of the baseline is the assessment of the contribution of primary microplastics. In most countries, there were only a minor contribution to the total leakage, but it could be different in other countries with better waste management infrastructure. In this example from Thailand, you can see, for example, that the contribution of pellets ranks quite high, and this is different in other countries because Thailand is a large plastic producer with a lot of pellets handling and processing. Next slide, please. So once the baseline is established, the second aspect of the guidance is to allow to identify hotspots. As previously stated, we have 5 categories of hotspots, and these 5 types of hotspots cover all the dimensions of the plastic value chain. We have the polymer hotspots, the application hotspots, the industry sector hotspots, the regional hotspots, and the waste management hotspots. So let's start with the 3 first, the polymer, application, and sector hotspots, because they are strongly interconnected, and these 3 are intended to answer the question, what is leaking in the country? So in the example on the slide before, the mass balance shown is applied to each of the polymer in a very granular way, showing in a way which polymer is leaking the most, which polymer is imported, produced, wasted, and leaked the most. You can see, it's still on the previous slide, sorry, that we also have developed a scoring system. You can see on the top right a quality score, which goes along the modeling and allows to assess the data and the modeling quality throughout the process, thus pushing for continuous improvement and also to identify where we might have data gaps. So this is part of the guidance. So next slide. So from these mass balances and leakage modeling, The hotspots are then defined for polymers as well as for applications and sectors. They are the polymers / applications / sectors leaking the most in the country. On this diagram, they are labeled in red. And these three information are very complementary because they speak to different target groups. For instance, polymer information is key to the waste management sector when setting strategies or deciding on investments. Application information is key more like to policymakers when they are prioritizing products for when thinking at ban, for example. Next slide. Yeah, the beauty of having these three types of hotspots is really that they are highly interconnected in the model. And for the technical eye, I think this is one of the value of the guidance. To illustrate that, for example, littering rates are very specific to applications. But in the model, we collect the data for the application, and then the information is transferred to the sector modeling in terms of the polymer modeling. The same, for example, the stock of plastic that is forming, this information is extracted from the sector modeling, like if it's plastic in the building industry, it will long laster, and then it's transferred to different applications and polymers to get a full and coherent picture. This really allows to reconcile these different types of data and get this coherent picture within the country and the plastic value chain. Next slide. So after having answered this what is leaking question comes the question, where is it leaking? And this part of the analysis is done by using open source GIS resources, so geographic information systems. And the guidance provide a very simple and clear workflow to overlay the different information that are needed, like waste generation rates within the country, collection rates within the country for different cities, provinces, etc., mismanagement rates within the country, as well as some geographic elements like the distance to shore and hydrological data. And all this, when overlaid, allows to yield a leakage map to highlight precisely where are the leakage hotspots within the country, for example, around big cities or along the rivers. And this is very useful to set priorities. Within the country, it allows to design some archetypes where you maybe can find or shape similar types of interventions and instruments. Next slide. So last of the hotspot type, the waste management hotspot. And this one, it's a different question. It allows to answer the question, why is it leaking? It's very important when trying to shape action. This is done through a more qualitative approach. The matrix has different components of the waste management, and it allows to map which are the drivers and the preventers of the leakage in the country. And this visualization can be associated with the different geographical archetypes to show where we have similar patterns or where this is not the case. In this example, you can see that mostly only the cleanup activities are in green below on the graph, and the rest higher up on the plastic management chain is more in red. And of course, we should higher up. We should aim for higher up action in the plastic management system to mitigate leakage. Next slide. So once all this technical analysis has been performed, the hotspot information is wrapped up in a much more cohesive and concise package, and we provide guidance on how to phrase actionable hotspots in sharp sentences, trying to replicate this logical what, where, why structure. We aim for around 15-20 of these sentences as an output, high-level output of the hotspotting analysis, and believe this is a good starting point to engage stakeholders in group discussion and shaping action. Next slide. So once we have achieved all this technical work, we move to the more strategic part of the guidance, which is about shaping action. And the guidance proposes a two-step approach through interventions and instruments. interventions are practical tools, practical solutions. In a way, it's the engineer perspective of the problem, and instruments are more a way how to implement these interventions and tools, and it's more like the policymaker or the manager viewpoint of the issue. So the guidance provides a framework to guide the process of converging toward these interventions and instruments. And also the guidance provides a by default list of these interventions and instruments. This avoids starting from a blank page and allows to capitalize on the best examples or business cases. So on the diagram on the right, you can see an example of extracted from the list of interventions with different categories and subcategories. It's of course much more complete in the tools that you can access. Next slide. So for both interventions and instruments, we propose a prioritization scheme. For interventions, the prioritization is based on two criteria: the mitigation potential of the intervention and the potential unintended consequences. For example, if one intervention would yield a higher carbon footprint. Of course, we favor interventions with high mitigation potential and low unintended consequences. Next slide. So similarly for instruments, we also have a prioritization system based on two criteria. One is the technical economical feasibility of the instrument, and the other one is the potential for synergies between instruments or synergies with other instruments already in place in the country. Again, this allows to identify priority instruments associated with priority interventions in a sort of funneling system. Last but not least, next slide, yes. One of the key outcomes of applying the guidance is to yield a clean data set for your country with key management, waste management metrics like collection rates or recycling rates per polymer type. And this is also key to monitor progress in the countries, as well as to funnel investments towards the most appropriate infrastructure or projects. For the private sector, this is also a very valuable information to feed all the plastic footprinting and eco-design projects and initiatives that take place. But now I leave the floor to Alexandre, who will explain how you can also get all this by applying the guidance.
Thank you very much, Julien, for sharing those insightful information on what we can get with this guidance. I am Alexandre Boucher from EA Consulting Group, behind the technical development of the guidance. Now let's see how we can use the guidance to get to those visual outputs and final results. So in order to get those results, the guidance offers a set of tools grouped into modules. Modules that are provided in a slide deck format are the instructions on how to use the tools and can be of two kinds. First, technical modules, which focus on generating plastic hotspot information, as we saw before, with bar charts and also maps, and that are more oriented toward people applying the guidance. And second, strategic modules, which focus on identifying the appropriate interventions and instruments based on the results you obtain through the technical modules. And those strategic modules are also open to other stakeholders, such as policymakers and economists. So each module comes with one or several tools. These tools are the building blocks of the guidance and are divided into three categories. One, input tools that are targeted at data collection with data libraries built from literature review and also data collection templates to guide interviews with relevant stakeholders to fill data gaps that you might have found in literature review. Two, assessment tools. They are used to generate the plastic pollution hotspots, as well as the fitting interventions and instruments to answer to those hotspots in each country. And three, output tools used to generate graphs and support the user in drawing conclusion with summarized information. Overall, the guidance offers more than 20 tools spanning across 9 modules. And to make a long story short, this guidance workflow is partitioned into those compact packages, each focusing on specific topics to smoothly guide users toward generating a complete analysis on plastic pollution hotspots. Now, let's briefly see how a module looks like. So here on the right, you can see the cover page of one slide deck, which is module T3. And the next slide will feature several illustrations of this slide deck for T3. Each module provides a guided approach with a clear description of the workflow and detailed instructions on how to use the tools inside it. For instance, module slides includes logograms to channel users' efforts into a step-by-step approach and offer an overview of how tools interact with one another within the module. Tools are either in the form of Excel files, PowerPoint templates, or also GIS models, which means geographical information systems, that are used to draw the nice maps you've seen in the section What You Get, presented by Julien before. And those tools are intended to be as accessible as possible. For users interested in the workings of the project, slides with detailed explanation on how the model works are also available for you to understand it fully so that you can apply it yourself, as you can see on the screen. All the 9 modules with their respective tools are already available online at plastichotspotting.lifecycleinitiative.org, and the website will also feature shortly some example reports from the country pilots conducted in Asia and Africa, and for which some high-level results will be presented to you in a while. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both Julien and Alex. We are going to now take a short 10-minute intermission for questions. So far, we don't have any questions submitted yet, but please submit your technical questions in the question or chat box. And we will start off, actually, with a question to the technical team about the use of these tools from a national level is how we have prepared this and we are sharing it. Could the technical team maybe speak a little bit to the use of the tools and the modules at a more local, city level or regional level in terms of application?
So Julien speaking. So of course the guidance is intended from the beginning to be applicable for a country, but we are already testing it also at a sub-national level for a region, an island, and soon for cities. I guess the framework is fully compatible with a smaller scale assessment. It will be sometimes challenging for the data. So in some cases, it will be an advantage, of course, for all the waste management data. It's easier to get good data at local level and more representative data of the very local conditions if we work at smaller scale. But for some other data like plastic inputs, they are often available at a national level. So then we have 2 options. One is downscaling the information to the region based on population or GDP, things like that. This is completely feasible, and this is what we do. And then you can apply the guidance at more local level, or in some cases it's even better. For some region, you get some information on the inputs in a way at a more regional level. Maybe not for all applications or sectors, but for some sectors. This is the case, for example, in some islands where we are working, we get much more granular information on the tourism industry, for example. So you can sometimes have even better results at local scale. So this is what we are now testing, and the guidance will be also maybe amended with information how to do this downscaling soon.
Terrific. Thank you, Julien, for that explanation. We have received a question, several questions now so far. And the first question we have is about the system. And the person would like to know if the system and the guidance also includes and regards the informal sector as another source. So if someone could speak a little bit to the informal sector aspect of this, that would be lovely.
Yeah, so informal sector is definitely very important when it comes to recycling, especially in these developing countries. And we saw that across all of the countries that we studied so far in Asia and in Africa, really most of the recycling of the locally produced waste comes from the informal sector. So we do make an effort to take that into account. And it is true that having reliable data on informal sector is challenging. One kind of way around that we find about this is that if the informal sector collects the waste and then sends it to recycling to like formal recyclers, then we can have the information, like we can have an estimate of the magnitude of the recycling by asking directly the recyclers. But if they recycle informally, so like really at household level, they do some melting of plastic and shredding of plastic, then it's harder to capture, and we rely on like on the ground reports to determine the scale and the magnitude.
Terrific. Thank you, Paula, for that response. We have a question now for Julien. How much primary research, questioning of citizens or fishers, for example, has been required to gather the data, ground truth, and use it as a basis to scale up the modeling?
So we have not performed field, we have not collected primary data part of this work. So the effort was about collecting existing data. So one, of course, the first level is all published data in different reports, publicly available or not. We try to gather that. And then second aspect, and this is where we got a very strong support for local IUCN teams, access the non-public published data from different sources. It can be governments, ministries, it can be local association, waste picker association. So it's more through interviews, things like that, that we got this data. So this is the first aspect. So of course the data collection has these different levels, and the more granular you get, the better. In terms of ground trusting, in a way, making these interviews and discussing with people on the ground was very useful in the process to validate and assess the quality of the data that we had already from other sources, reports, etc. I guess the next step will be to also compare in a way the result of the model with waste survey in cities in different areas within the country, and find a way to in a way calibrate the model. This has been done in some areas and we use it, but if we could replicate that or scale up this type of approach, it would be great.
Terrific. Thank you so much for that response. We now have a question for both Feng and Julien, but Feng, I'll let you start first. The question is, how does the IUCN hotspot methodology link with the global analysis developed by Pew and System? It would be great to learn more about IUCN's collaboration with other organizations' methodologies. So let's start a little bit with Feng, and then Julien possibly, and Janica at the end maybe. That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think it's very valid. And what we are trying here to develop, it definitely, it's not something from scratch, but rather than learning from everybody, and also trying to maximize synergy with existing initiatives and also methodologies. Throughout the development of this guidance that we started 2.5 years ago, we have been in a very consultative process that we include the discussion and also review with key agencies like University of Leeds, ISWA, including Systemic and Pew, by sharing early thinking and draft with them so that we get feedback from them. Having said that, another feature of the whole methodology and guidance is that we are taking a modular approach. As you have seen that there are different components from quantifying plastic sources, production, consumption, to downstream like different recycling treatment channel. Each of them needs specific modeling and method. So what we're trying to do here is create a different layer or cascading models that if there's available detailed modeling from other institutes, we can always save a place to include a more detailed reference to them by using that. So this is make it in a way that our methodology serve the purpose of taking the learning from existing open source tool and database to make sure that we are using multiple references and also data sources to carry out analysis. Having said that, of course, each different method and initiative, they have different purposes. The assessment part of this guidance, it's mainly a measurement of the status quo of the plastic value chain and pollution. While I understand that Systemic and Pew, they're also doing a lot of scenario modeling and forecasting. I think the data from our methods and guidance can definitely support, you know, this kind of assessment. At the same time, the work we are developing here is a kind of evolving document and also evolving tool that we are also able to absorb new developments and new information into the framework, so that in case any of the audience you have also heard of any new methodology and also studies, please do get in touch with us. We'll make sure that this is updated regularly in our methodology and in the tools. So I will hand over to colleagues in IUCN to further talk about their connection with other agencies.
So maybe Julien, I can just comment on that quickly on the technical side, as I was part of the expert panel for the Pew Systemic work. The scope of the work is quite different because the Pew Systemic is the global analysis when we are doing more country analysis, and in a way the global approach with Pew Systemic, we only had I mean, the data quality that we could find in terms of recycling and collection rates from generic sources. So I think the work we have been doing in specific countries, and hoping this will be scaled up and replicated in many other countries, will be very useful to feed this type of global modeling and scenario analysis like the Pew Systemic work in the coming years. And we might see that it will yield some differences in the model because, and you will see it later today in the presentation, if you have this more granular approach on per polymer type in terms of collection and recycling, you see sometimes big differences. And this is not the average I mean, the average is the average, but it's not representative of everything. So I guess the two work streams are very complementary, and we hope we can strengthen the connections in the future.
From an IUCN perspective, in a practical level, we do collaborate with other organizations. As I mentioned earlier, it's very much at the national level, a multi-stakeholder process that brings together essentially a diverse set of stakeholders, not just from large non-profit organizations or other institutions working at similar levels, but even nationally. And as an example, in Thailand, I understand from some of our work, we've actually come working closely with some of the universities there that have also been working on similar approaches. So in terms of collaborating and organizing, I think that's an integral part of our work. It also, I would say, helps some of the material that we've gathered already from this project and our work has actually fed into other projects that are currently ongoing, done by a different set of organizations, whether it be the WWF in Thailand or most recently the University of Leeds in Vietnam, that are doing a different scale of project. So feeding into particularly what has happened, I think, from the work we are doing, and as Julian mentioned, is that you can look at it at different scales: global, national, regional, local. And so where the value comes in is that the information that comes from these types of national assessments can actually then also help feed into those global assessments, and even downstream at the level of local and localized assessments. But all of that really fundamentally depends on collaboration. And what I can say at this time is that at least 3 other organizations who are doing similar sort of work in very specific areas have been collaborating with us in terms of exchanging of information at this time at a very practical level. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you, Janica. We have one last question, and then we're going to move to the country case studies. And the last question will be for Paula, and it is: in taking into account the hydrology in your model, do you provide a source to sea geographic analysis of the leakage, and what is leading to the leakage?
Sorry, I forgot to mute. Yeah, so about how to actually compute the macro leakage from mismanaged waste. We do look at hydrological factors like the water runoff on the surface. So basically that's the water that goes above the surface, and it's not like I don't know, doesn't sink into the soil. Sorry about that. And then we also take into account the distance from each. So for each kilometer square, we look at how much waste is generated there, thanks to population data. So we have like a region, we know how much waste is generated in the region, and then we assign it per kilometer square based on the population density. And then we look like what's the water runoff, surface water runoff in that region, and like how far is this point to like a main water body. So these are main rivers and the coastline. And basically then we use some assumption to then derive the total leakage. So, and these assumptions are based on earlier study from Le Breton and John Beck, if it's like a technical audience. I hope I replied to the question.
That's perfect. Thank you, Paula. Now, everyone, we would like to move on to the second part of the webinar, which is sharing results from Africa and Asia. We're going to speak a little bit about the IUCN Mar Plastics project and its truly multi-stakeholder approach, as has been mentioned several times. The first speaker will be Mr. Peter Manyara from our Eastern and Southern Africa office. And Peter, I will hand it over to you to begin.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lynn. It's a pleasure to present and to share the application of this methodology within the Eastern and Southern African region, and to highlight the key results of at least one country, and in this case, Kenya. So I'll mention that I'm only giving an overview, as the full results are quite detailed and are captured in a detailed report that will be available soon to all the stakeholders participating herein, once it's validated with national stakeholders. And so just to recap something that Julian already said, the full country reports contain more details on the 5 hotspot categories, the actionable hotspot formulations, and an initial dose of interventions and instruments that we could consider that are already contextualized to the priority hotspots for the specific country. So next slide, please. Yes, so on this slide, I provide a breakdown of the country overview into 3 logical parts. The first part is a more global view. The second part is we zoom into some select hotspots. And then the third part, we try to outline how these two and the results help in shaping action and driving interventions at the national level. So starting from the left side, we see that in Kenya, of about 506,000 tons of plastic waste generated every year, 92% of it is mismanaged. And someone might wonder why is such a high rate, yet collection we are saying is 27. It's because mismanaged is related to waste that is improperly disposed, uncollected, or leaking waste. And this will become much more clear in the next slide. So in terms of collection, the collection rate in Kenya average is quite low, at 27%, which is just about 136,000 tons of the 5 or 6 kilotons, which means that the bulk of the waste, plastic waste in Kenya, is either lying in some environmental compartment, maybe in the terrestrial or aquatic environments, or in some other place, like dump sites or illegal places where waste is just get to accumulate. So in the case of Kenya, maybe one of the things that really contributes to this picture is the fact that there's not a single sanitary landfill in the country. And so if, for example, we were to have 5 sanitary landfills in the country, then you'd see that the mismanaged rate will significantly maybe go down, especially if that waste is emanating from high waste generating areas. And so in a case where a lot of it is being mismanaged, it's definitely bound to leak, irrespective of where it ends up. If it ends up in a Dandora dump site, it will still leak. And the per capita leakage rate in Kenya is not as high as what you'd expect maybe in countries which are developing quite rapidly. It's 0.8 kilograms per person per year. When you compare that to other countries, I think you'll see in upcoming slides for Thailand, which is almost 7 or 8-fold this particular figure, and for South Africa is almost double that. So if you go to the middle section of the slide, in terms of hotspots, we just zoom into the polymer hotspots, where we found that the top 4 leaking polymers in absolute leakage terms are PP, polyester, PET, and LDPE, which cumulatively account for about 70% of plastic leakage in the country. But then, in terms of their leakage rates, there are different dimensions to that. In that, if you look at PET, for example, which ranks third in terms of absolute volumes, it's quite high when it comes to leakage rate. Because if you look at the flow path from maybe production to consumption to it ending up in some environmental compartment, it's quite rapid. So the leakage rate for PET is the highest in the country. And then we also see like 4 cities in the country account for about 35% of waste mismanagement. So interventions, for example, in just these 4 cities already gives us some good output in terms of reducing or diverting plastic waste from ending up in the oceans. And then the convergence of these results, as already pointed out by Julian, is that it helps us engage more effectively with country stakeholders, and so helping us align towards pursuing some strategic actions, instruments, and measures that are addressed by science, and at least address the real problem, not based on emotions or maybe visuals of maybe people seeing plastics accumulating in some corner or something like that. So in terms of shaping action, for the case of Kenya, we already have 11 actionable hotspots. And an example is widespread littering reduces the amount of waste collected for recycling. And then we have a set of accompanying instruments that span very many different areas, from knowledge, capacity building, innovation, economic, and policy and regulatory frameworks. So there's definitely different options to address the different hotspots. And then what the results also help in doing is, in a country like Kenya, where extended producer responsibility is becoming a very important topic, and the country is trying to put measures to get producers and brand owners and related to address their specific plastic strains, waste strains. PET is a priority in Kenya. So in such a case, for example, you can go to the particular polymer PET and set your baselines and targets using the baseline that has been developed by this particular analysis. So in such case, you don't need to invest more to get like additional or repeat the process. So it saves countries resources from that dimension. And then the other maybe cost-saving aspect that I can highlight is it also helps countries to avoid investing immense resources to address non-priority plastic or polymer leakages. Where, for example, you can go to you can go for a particular polymer like PVC, yet you find its prioritization as a hotspot, or even in terms of impact further downstream in the oceans, is quite insignificant or minimal. So in such a case, I think that's very strategic. And then on the next slide, please. So in terms of a baseline, as Julian already pointed out, we start with a mass balance approach. So on the left chart, we can see some key plastic inputs. And in the case of Kenya, we find that all plastics are imported into the country in either product form or primary virgin plastic. And on the output bar, we try to account for the export of primary and products that are manufactured within the country of Kenya, into mostly the Eastern African region. Then we account for change in stock, we account for waste, and we also account for recycling. Something of interest is these bars will change depending on maybe what is happening in the country at the moment, where when, for example, there is rapid development going on within the country, the increase in stock component, for example, we find expands a bit more and pushes the other bars maybe upwards or downwards. And on the waste side of things, I mentioned that a very tiny fraction of waste is exported. Some gets recycled, as already mentioned from the previous slide, but the bulk of it ends up as mismanaged waste. So the local recycled component is about just 7%, which is quite minimal, as this is only about 35.4 thousand tons. On the leakage side of things, we see that about 37,000 tons of plastic waste leaks into the oceans every year. So one might wonder why such a low leakage rate when we have about 465,000 tons of mismanaged waste. And I think Paola has already pointed out that there are a number of factors which account for which plastic ends up in the oceans, so that you can't find maybe plastic from Turkana in the northwest ending up in the oceans. So on the right bar, we are looking at a granular, on the right chart, we're looking at granular data on mismanaged waste index of different plastic polymers, of which we see majority of them are much higher than the Jambe benchmark for Kenya of 85%. So this kind of result is especially useful for companies that put products out there in the market, in terms of helping them understand their levels of pollution of maybe specific products or polymers. And in the case of Kenya, you don't see major differences in the bars, and that's largely associated or linked to the low recycling rates in the country. So in the next case country, you'll see that where there are interventions for particular polymers, then you see significant differences between the MWIs of mismanaged waste indexes of the bars. Next slide, next and last slide, please. So the analysis also helps us to generate maps that at least visually show us the rates of mismanaged waste from different parts of the country. And that's denoted on the map you're looking at with the red to maroon colors, and also the leakage rate emanating from the fisheries sector. So if you look at the yellow, for example, you see some of the, I don't know whether it's yellow or orange, forgive my color blindness. Some of it is in like light shade and some is dark shade. So you can at least zoom in into where maybe there's a lot more fisheries activity and maybe there's more disposal or abandonment of fishing gear. And then the other major observation you get from this visual expression is that when you look at the map, you find that where there are major cities and urban areas, a lot of waste generation tends to emanate from there. And in the case of Kenya, we find there's quite variation in terms of the spectrum of waste generation, where urban areas generate as high as 30 kilograms per person per year, and rural areas generate as low as 4 kilograms per person per year. So there's that variation, but I think all I can say with this is the more granular data you can get maybe from each sub-county and even moving to the ward level, then you can get like a really good resolution map of where waste is coming from, how it's being addressed, and where it's going. So I think with that, I'll stop there, and thank you very much, Lynn.
Thank you very much, Peter, for that comprehensive overview of Kenya. We'll now move to results for Thailand, presented by Ms. Maeve Nightingale.
Good. Hello, everybody. My name is Maeve Nightingale. I'm speaking to you from Bangkok this evening. I coordinate the Coastal and Marine Program for the IUCN Asia region, covering Southeast Asia and South Asia, including the regional marine plastic work. So this first slide here is very similar. This example is very similar to the example you just heard from Kenya, follows a very similar format. I will be discussing the Thailand country report. This is the cover of that report. And as has been mentioned, once validated, this Thailand country report will be shared online. But as you can see from the Kenya report, it represents a huge body of work that has been completed in terms of putting data together and looking at it from an analytical perspective. So in the next 3 slides, similar to the report from Kenya, I will take you through some of the headline results that are coming from the National Hotspot Assessment for Thailand. So this is starting with the Thailand Hotspot overview. This shows a summary of the key result areas. Behind these figures, of course, is some very dense information. They're the same 3 parts, some of the summary as for the Kenya report. The left-hand side showing the global overview, the middle section, the highlights from the hotspots, and then the third section moves to the shaping action, looking at actions and interventions that respond to the assessment results. So if we start on the left-hand side, looking at the headlines, we see that 65% of waste generated in Thailand is collected, but about 50% of that collected waste is going to landfills and is unfortunately improperly managed. So when you look at that in the context of the 35% of waste generated, which is uncollected, this results in the mismanaged waste rate that you see there of 66%. In Thailand, about 10% of waste generated is collected for recycling. Most of this, which is 7%, is recycled locally or domestically. And overall in Thailand, we see 483,000 tons of plastic leaking into the ocean every year, which is the equivalent of 7 kilograms per capita leakage, which, as Peter has mentioned, is quite a big difference from Kenya's 0.8 kilos per capita leakage. If you turn to the middle section here, you see the highlights from some of the 3 of the hotspots. Looking at the applications or products, we see that the top 2 concerns relate to the thin film nylon bags, shopping bags, carrier bags that are used in Thailand, and then the smaller cellophane food packages, which is used by a lot by the street food industry. When we look at the polymers or the different types of plastics, we see LDPE and HDPE as 2 of the major polymers of major concern in the Thailand context. And the third section of the middle looks at the different stages of the waste management process, and we see a number of red dots there. The more red dots, the worse the attribution of the leakage issue in terms of waste management and the different stages of waste management. So we see there clearly issues with waste generation, waste collection, and waste-related behavior, as well as infrastructure. Here we see the Thailand baseline figures, starting on the left with the material flow, where we see the left column is inputs, including that large purple section that shows import of production of primary plastic, and the column on the right showing the output, including that pale purple section that looks at export. So you can see that Thailand is both a producer and an exporter of plastic. More than half of plastic produced or imported in Thailand is ultimately exported. By contrast, you saw with the Kenya report that Kenya is a net importer of plastic, and it's very small amount, very insignificant amount of export from Kenya. The amount of waste imported, you will also notice that small section in dark green on the left column shows you the import of waste, and you will note if you look at the small section here, the pale green on the right, it is larger than the recycling capacity of Thailand. So waste imported to Thailand is 556 kilotons, and the recycling capacity of Thailand is 500 kilotons. And there's a lot more that we are interested to understand around the systems and the recycling value chains that are going on in Thailand right now. This has flagged up a very interesting area for looking further into. You'll also see a new bar on this bar chart on the left, which you didn't see in Kenya, which is the properly disposed in blue in the right-hand column. And this says properly disposed waste of 2,090 kilotons, which we didn't see that in Kenya. And we attribute this, of course, to the access to sanitary landfill system that is available in Thailand. If we move over now to the right-hand side of the slide, the mismanaged waste index by polymer. And maybe of most interest here is you see that all of the figures, in fact, are below the baseline presented in the Jambek report, and we can consider that, of course, most of the areas within Thailand are considered coastal areas, and that's what the Jambek report focused on. But if we just draw attention here to the first bar from the bottom, the PET, and we can see that there is a lower rate of mismanaged waste index on the mismanaged waste index here of 28%. That means 28% chance of PET being mismanaged, which is relatively low. And this is attributed to the fact that there is high levels of PET collection and recycling in Thailand. There's a well-established market and value chains for PET in Thailand. If we compare that then to the fourth dark purple bar, the LDPE, we see that this low-density polyethylene has a 68% waste management index because it really is not being recycled at a significant level in Thailand. It's not being targeted and collected. And as Peter mentioned as well, this is proving to be very interesting information for companies as well, for them to understand what gets into the market and which polymers are contributing to the overall leakage in the system. And finally, we look at Thailand regional hotspots or the subnational hotspots. On the left, you see a map of hotspots relating to waste generation. And on the right, you see a map showing plastic leakage. The pinks and reds are looking at leakage on land as a result of land-based inputs. And the yellow coloring is showing plastic leakage from fishing debris, at sea source of marine debris. And what you can notice immediately is that there's no perfect match between or overlap between the waste.
Sorry about that, folks. It looks like we're having a little bit of a technical glitch with the internet connection there. I think, though, that the wrap-up that Peter did on Kenya also explains fairly well the maps that you're seeing for Thailand in terms of what you're seeing in the maps and the data and where it comes from. And this actually leads me to the next slide, which we are going to cover policy and business next, but in between, we're going to take 10 minutes now to answer some more questions. We've gotten quite a few questions related to data, and we'll start with a question for Alexandra. That is, in some countries, accurate data is challenging generally. So to what extent can estimates, models, etc. be used, especially in small islands with limited data? The ability to focus on specific sectors such as tourism is very interesting, and a little more could be said on this. And this is great because Alex is a really good example for us from our pilot work that we're doing in Menorca.
So yes, this is a very interesting question. I think the question is twofold. The first one is about the accuracy of data across the board for all the countries we've been piloting. And then specifically for islands, indeed, this is a special case that I can elaborate on just after that. So first thing, for the different countries, sometimes finding data from desktop study and also even from actually doing interviews is challenging, and the quality is variable from one country to the other. So we try as much as possible to reconcile all the different levels of quality of data. This is reflected by our data quality score that Julien showed in one slide before in the top right corner, but maybe you forgot about it. But at least we are assessing several criteria to ensure that our results are robust enough from the different sources we have. And also, this is a challenge that maybe I think other people in the attendance will elaborate on, but it is difficult indeed to access some data, and we had the chance to have an eye on unpublished data, and this is the first step of the modules of this guidance, is to help you navigate through the data collection effort. And we hope that it will harmonize the way we can gather information and find the most up-to-date information to have the best overview of what is happening in the country. So now maybe about the other point about islands. Indeed, some data in islands are more difficult than in other countries to get. For instance, the import-export data. We are using, for the moment, the UN country database that is focused on countries. And for areas that we have been piloting recently, such as Cyprus, but more specifically for Menorca, we don't have access to such data. So this might be a challenge, but it is balanced by another asset from the data generated in the islands. It is that, as it was mentioned in the question, the islands usually are tourism, have a high importance tourism sector, and we need. Sorry, I hear talking in the same time. Yeah, thank you. And it is possible actually to access very granular data, geographical data on tourism. So this is something that we might not have for countries in Africa and Asia, but we have, and we will show and showcase on the website in the coming month, for you to have a look. But we can actually have a way to overcome those data issues in islands, as it is a closed system, and it might be easier than in big countries to conduct on-field surveys at retailers and also monitor actually import and exports if efforts are put on this kind of data collection. And in that way, data for islands might be very granular and up to date. Thank you.
Oh, that's terrific. Thank you so much, Alex, for that. And welcome back, Maeve. Apologies for losing you there. We have one last comment on data and islands and collection from Janica related to plastic waste-free islands.
Thank you for the comment. It really is a very valuable comment when we talk about small islands. And quite interestingly, IUCN has a project that is currently being implemented in the Caribbean and Pacific. And in that particular case, when we originally started, we had thought about using the guidance, but in relation to the availability of information and data that one could find, we ultimately decided it required actually physical data collection. So there are times when you actually have to go down and spend the money to actually collect and new information and data right from scratch, and then use that in the decision-making process. So it is a problem, but in certain instances, it ultimately requires really the absolute physical collection of new information and data. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing that information about the data collection. We have one last question, and then we will move to the policy and business presentations. The last question is for Paola, and it is about data. How complex is it to gather all of the required data in these countries, and in terms of resources and timing?
I guess Janaka and Alexandre already talked a bit on this point. Maybe what I could say is that for some data, like for instance, trade data or demographic data, there are available database online that contain information for all countries. So for instance, for trade, that's Comtrade, and for demographic data, that's a website from NASA or NASA, I don't know how you call it. And but then for other data, like recycling, that's much more country specific, and either like there is an existing report there, or you need to be in contact with the right stakeholders on the ground, or you can use, you know, sometimes like some averages. And then, as Alexander pointed out, like you note all of this down in the pedigree metrics, like in the data quality assessment. So in the end, you have a quality score for your analysis. But also what I wanted to highlight is that we see all of these bars and all of these numbers, like these are not all data that we just found out there. Like the guidance allows you to fill in the gaps for a lot of data that are not available, because it reconciles. So for instance, like you start from polymer, and then the guidance can take this polymer data and bring them to the sectors. So you don't have to manually input all of these values and to have all of this information already available. And the guidance and the tool can guide you through that to basically narrow down what are the data that are really needed and on which you have to focus your effort on data collection.
Terrific. Thank you, Paola, for that. And as I mentioned, we will now move into the third part of the webinar, and we will now cover some policy and business aspects. The policy aspects will be covered by IUCN's Juan Manuel Sabio Mortia from the Environmental Law Center in Bonn, Germany. And the business aspects will be covered by Gerard Boss, who's from IUCN headquarters in Glon, who is part of the director for the Business and Biodiversity Program. Off to you, Juan.
Thank you very much, Lynn, and thank you very much to everyone. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Juan Manuel Sabio Mortia. I am a legal officer at the Environmental Law Center here in Bonn, Germany, and we are currently working on the policy and legal aspects of marine plastic pollution in very different jurisdictions around the world, which I will take you through in a very brief presentation. Next slide, please. As you may see, we have been working on 5 scoping reports from 2 different regions. The regions are Africa as well as Asia. In Africa, we have conducted 3 scoping reports in Kenya, South Africa, and Mozambique, with the help of national local experts on the ground who have assisted us in creating these scoping reports. And on the Asian side, we have had also experts to conduct this scoping report in Vietnam and Thailand. These reports are almost finalized. They are coming very, very soon. And once they have been completed and finalized, they will be available on the ELC website, as you may see the link below. If I may say, the main aspects of this scoping report is to have actually national background, as well as the international obligations of the different countries, also the relevant institutions and processes which deal with marine plastic pollution, and also the specific legal frameworks, existing frameworks, as well as what other jurisdictions in the regions or around the world are currently doing in order to cater for the issue of marine plastic pollution. And at the same time, trying to identify possible gaps and challenges which the different countries are experiencing. Next slide, please. In order to create this scoping report, we've had to engage, as well as the local experts on the ground, with various different local stakeholders to make sure that the needs of the country, the needs of the people are taken into account, so that the substance of this report are concrete and also accurate. This report, as I mentioned previously, identified certain gaps and challenges from a legislation point of view, and at the same time, recommendations on the way forward. And very importantly, from this scoping report is the fact that certain legal tools needed to be identified. And by legal tools, I mean, what could the country do in order to perhaps improve the situation of marine plastic pollution? So a very simple example of a legal tool which have to be identified in each of the 5 countries would be, for instance, EPR, extended producer responsibility, or perhaps implement tax on certain plastic products, or simply just applying a strict ban on certain products. So these are legal tools which, depending on the situation of each country, these legal tools were identified by and also preferred by the local stakeholders, and these local tools and legal tools would then be the foundation of in-depth policy effectiveness assessment reports, which are also currently working on, and which will also be updated onto the ELC website as per the link previously mentioned. Next slide, please. And this last slide, basically, in summary, the 5 scoping reports that we have been working on, which are almost finalized, encompass Mozambique, South Africa, Kenya, Thailand, and Vietnam. This will be uploaded on the website together with the in-depth policy assessment reports. And these reports also will be in the local languages as well. So they will be also in English, Thai, Vietnamese, English, Portuguese, as well as English for all of them. And as soon as they're finalized, they will be uploaded. We estimate that the scoping reports for the 5 countries will be up and running on the ELC website by the end of this month. And the in-depth policy assessment reports, which, as I mentioned, focus more on the legal tools which were identified by the local stakeholders, that would be uploaded onto the ELC website by the end of November. So that's basically, in a very short period of time, in a nutshell, the policy aspects of the work that the ELC has been conducting on marine plastic pollution in the various jurisdictions. Thank you very much. Back to you, Lynn.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Juan Manuel. I will now introduce Gerard Voss, who's the Director of the Business and Biodiversity Program here at IUCN, and he will discuss the issues around business.
Great. Good afternoon or good morning for some of you. It's great to still see so many of you on this call and being patient with us. So this is the last piece before we enter in a more broader Q&A session. And really my effort here is to show you what's the business interest in this process, because as you heard from the hotspotting analysis, you know, this is really a start of a journey. And at IUCN, as Janaka highlighted at the beginning of this presentations, is that we hope this to be really a multi-stakeholder dialogue, a dialogue that has the policymakers in the room, and Juan explained on why they are so important, civil society, academia and research, but of course we also want business to be at the table. And very often you have, you know, this image that you use there, that I use there, where it says, and then a miracle occurs. Well, the miracle can only occur when good information and trusted information is on the table, and when all parties all together are really creating a combined or a joint willingness to end the plastic leakage. So this is why so much effort was put in developing this methodology, but also in grounding it in the 5 landscapes described earlier, and you saw the 2 examples in both Thailand and Kenya. So for business, what this actually does, it helps them to really clarify the extent of the issue. It also hopefully helps to focus where to concentrate on, and in particular which polymers or which applications or which uses of plastics are potentially problematic in these countries. But the other element, which is also very interesting, it's not only the risk, but it's also the opportunity side, because it also helps highlighting the business and the investment opportunity for a better and a more efficient waste management system, for example, or for a need on how to transfer from more informal practices to transition them to a more formal economy. So really what we think is that this methodology helps identify the areas in need of urgent action and make sure that business actually part of the solutions rather than only seen as the source of the problem. Next slide, please. So together with Qantas and the EA team, we actually also contributed to the development of the plastic leak project. And this, to a certain extent, is the business equivalent of what you just saw. So it's basically looking at similar global data sets, but it's coupled with the proprietary information that companies have. This can be sales information, their raw material, their packaging, or their purchasing, or their data on their mode of transportation of the various products and services. So this helps to a certain extent ground truthing the hotspot analysis, which is at the country level, or at the sub-regional level, to actually make this relevant to the actual business and help them raising the issue and understanding the issue within their own company and their locations. It also helps to raise the urgency and the magnitude of action required within their own company, because that information presented in the simple slides that we showed you before allows actually that information to go all the way up to the financial director or the CEO of the company. And so several initiatives we've actually noted have really benefited from all these efforts that were happening where now better data is available. And these are local business platforms, and we've got a number of examples in Thailand, and in Vietnam specifically, there is one where IUCN has been involved with a group called the PRO partnership, packaging recycling organization, which has a number of food and beverage companies that are involved. And they basically have set up themselves 3 main targets, which is to identify and develop and implement pilot local initiatives of mutual interest, really promoting good practices and lessons learned, but also provide capacity building support on sustainable business practices. So there you see, once good data is available, when a good platform for dialogue is there, then suddenly this spurs some initiatives where the different actors are willing to work together. Similar efforts have happened in Africa, and these are more around the extended producer responsibility, and we touched upon that already several times in this presentation. So what we're really saying is, as I said at the beginning of my intervention, this is only the start of the journey, because what we want to see in the end is all these actions and these interventions really coming to fruition. But what is very interesting is that we think also that the hotspotting methodology, with more data accurate information that we have out now, we will also be able to measure progress and actually be able to evaluate which actions are cost effective and really beneficial to reducing plastic leakage versus other ones that we might be better forgetting about it and look for other new, better opportunities and basically make a better return on investment. That's it from my side, and looking forward to an interactive question and answer session.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Gerard, for that. We are at the end of the third section and the last section of the webinar. And we'd like to reiterate that all of the material, the guidance, the modules, and the tools are available on the website, the plastichotspotting.lifecycleinitiative.org website. And we are now moving into the Q&A portion of the webinar. We will take the next 25 minutes or so for Q&A, and we already have lined up 6 questions. The first question will be for Feng, and it is a question from the UNEP Cartagena Convention to the wider Caribbean region, and they'd be interested in testing this methodology. In terms of the UNEP connection here, if you could address that for your partners in the Caribbean, that would be lovely in terms of how they can move forward.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ling, and thank you for the question. I can almost guess probably the question is coming from Chris, the colleague in UNEP. As you are aware that UNEP is soon to have a new project in Latin America to implement circular economy of plastic in different cities. So one of the key suggestions from our focal point and task manager in the project is to use the guidance in a couple of cities that in the project. So indeed, that's in I think Jamaica and Panama, as well as Brazil and Colombia within the scope of the project or connection with the project, so that we're ready to use the tool to support different colleagues in the team that will be working the project to test it, and also hopefully share the result for the analysis. And that's the quick response for your question. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Feng. Our next question is, why does the hotspot overview show PET and polyester separately? They are the same polymer. So could someone from Qantas or from someone from EA please address the issue between PET and polyester being similar?
So Julien speaking. So I mean, in the database and in the information, we had different lines for polyester and polymer, and they are not strictly speaking identical. So polyester is used in many industrial structures and also used in the textile industry. So I guess they represent different types of use of a very similar polymer.
Great, thank you very much. We now have a question for the Asia region for Naive. And the question is the hotspotting available for India?
Actually, there's a lot of interest coming from India, and the part that I got cut off at earlier, I was just about to mention that we have a consortium working in the ASEAN region to look at using this toolkit across the ASEAN member countries. And there's a similar interest now emerging from South Asia, and we're very interested to expand the work to South Asia. So we're looking at the development of another consortium to start looking at collecting baseline data that will be very relevant to this tool. And we can keep you tuned on that through our IUCN India office. We are currently in discussion with a number of different groups that are interested in this and trying to find some funding for that.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Maya, for that. And Feng, could you address this as well a little bit in terms of the overarching plans for expanding this work moving into the future into countries and cities?
Yeah, I think that's also a good discussion point for the next step of the project. By the way, we are also having a country office in India. Of course, that when it comes to India, it's a big country, so probably it needs a bit much more resources and also effort to pull things together if we want to. Sorry, I need to turn on my camera. Yes, in order to start any work at national level. So as the next step of the whole project, as you can see that thanks to many IUCN's efforts, the tool has been already testing in hands of our countries, and we see there is a lot of interest popping out after the publication of the guidance in July. And we are also receiving more requests from different parts of the world to reapply it. What we see clearly now is that we would like to have the knowledge that sitting in the project being spread to the different parts of the world, in the region or in the country, so that we can, let's say, create regional, let's say, center of excellence or hub that are able to apply the work at local and national level. So on one hand, that we definitely will do more capacity development webinar like this, but also we would like to probably identify key experts or practitioners who are able to carry out the work for their own region and country, so that we can definitely want to increase the capacity and also replicate the work in much more numbers of country. So this is the plan. So I think it's also a two-way collaboration that we are happy to support here. If there's any interest from your country or region to apply it, and also we have to find a more established and also more stable way to provide, let's say, technical support, troubleshooting, and also timely feedback for such application. So I think that's where we would like to work with everybody more and more in the future to let's say for wider application. Yes.
Thank you so much, Feng, for that. We have another question that is again related to data and the lack of data common to developing countries. In the previous questions, we did answer the issue around the lack of data, but is there someone who would like to talk a little bit about the data situation and possibly how we are addressing this from a larger data repository standpoint moving into the future, so that we can actually use and share and gather data so that others can use it as well?
So maybe a quick point on the data question. I mean, data is important, but we must remember why we need the data. So the first goal of the guidance is to define hotspots and not, you know, to have the very precise data for everything and everywhere. We want just good enough data to inform the hotspotting process. So in a way, if you don't have the perfect data in your country, you probably also do not have the high-level overview of the situation, and we can generate this high-level overview with, you know, average data and proxy and extrapolation. And then if you progress and you get more maturity, then of course you want more granular hotspots and you need more granular data. So I think there is a learning curve there. And I mean, in a way, we start with what you have, you start to improve your understanding of the situation, and this is calling for more and better data. So I guess I would say that there is no obstacle, and the lack of data should not be an obstacle for setting priorities and starting shaping action. That's the first point. And the second point is that, of course, we all want, I would not say better data, and most of all, more transparency and access to this data. And I think the next step will be to develop a data repository to make all these data available with the good governance, so we can update them and trust them in the future.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Julien. Now, we are a little bit ahead of schedule, and as such, what we would like to do is inform everyone that we are going to be planning some technical webinars that are much more aimed at technical practitioners. And I would like to hand over to both Janica and Feng to discuss this and some of the next steps that you can each do moving forward with the guidance as it is, the tools, the modules, and the website.
Well, thank you, Lynn, for that. The next steps really are getting a lot of this information out to you and actually helping capacity development and building at different levels. As Feng has already pointed out, this is very much the first step of our work and showing out what we have done so far. So building on this and taking it to the next phase, particularly in terms of getting stakeholders across the world to better understand the model and also apply it and learn more from it We have used it in 7 different situations, but I think as we learn from its application through different methods and processes, the model can be refined and improved further. So we see this as a living product that will grow in the future. Very specifically from IUCN's point of perspective of where we are, the next year what we do see is really focusing on providing more support to engage with our current set of stakeholders to ensure that the material and the methodology is integrated as much as possible at national levels. Also to help identify, as Julien pointed out, those areas that are critical for more information and help support the actions and policies that might help fill that information, because ultimately that would also improve the process. So in this respect, I would certainly encourage all of you to help provide us with the kinds of information needs you have. And this is actually quite important in terms of identifying how the tool is applied and improved. And certainly as you use it, please get in touch with us. We would very much like to see how we can coordinate and support you. I'm going to pass this on to Feng for the last few words on where we are going from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Janica. So also under the framework of this project, we have a couple of planning that's in short term. I think it's mainly relevant to the time zone we're speaking now. The guidance was originally developed in English, but we have already translated it into Portuguese, and thanks to in-kind contribution from the Brazil office of UNEP. We are also in the process of translating that into Spanish and French. So this will also ensure that probably there'll be more uptake from the country speaking this type of language. And if there's also a need to translate in more languages, please to get in touch with us. We also encourage you, if you have, let's say, a dedicated time that can help us to translate into more languages as in-kind, we'll be really appreciating that. Today, as we are speaking, that all the tools and modules have been already uploaded to our website. We have to make a disclaimer that they are interim version because we are still testing them. But it will be great if you can take a look and try to use it, and also tell us where we can further, let's say, improve them. And at the end of the day, as Janica mentioned, that we'll be thrilled to hear from you that if you are going to use it in your national or city context, we'll be very happy to share the existing experience with you and also support you further. Maybe we can already go to the next slide. I think we still have 10 minutes. If you have any questions or potential ideas for collaboration, please do let us know. As I said, this is a kind of long journey that we have been really working hard on this project in the past 2.5 years. It's great that it's turned out to be this kind of product we are showing today. We mainly would like to give the gratitude to SIDA and also the government of Norway for providing the funding for both methodological development and parallel testing that in the countries that IUCN have been leading. And also thanks a lot to EN Quantis for taking care of the technical parts of the work. I think that's the end of the session today, but I think this is only a beginning of another journey. Hopefully that we'll be able to expand the application scope for this guidance while we are further improving the quality of the tool and the module at a regular basis. At the end of the day, also, we are looking forward to a kind of mechanism. How do we share data and analysis results from different countries in a more harmonized way, so that the results we are collecting might be also useful for future initiative and project. So this is the end of the whole webinar session. We encourage everyone to get in touch with us and also to have more interaction with us in this topic. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Feng, and thank you everyone for your time today. Just one last question before we close, and that is about incorporating the circular economy interventions in the tool. And yes, circular economy interventions are included in the tool, and in fact, the Mar Plastics project itself has 5 separate circular economy projects happening in each of the countries in Kenya. Mozambique, South Africa, Thailand, and Vietnam. And if you go to the IUCN webpage and look for the Marplastics under Close the Plastic Tap program, you can see the Marplastics Circular Economy projects that are listed there. With that, thank you everyone for your questions and for your time today. And we will be providing this webinar as well as the earlier one as recordings on the website. And the slides will also be available as well. And we will be following up with each of you in an email after this. And we will be hosting additional webinars coming in the next few months. So thank you all. Have a lovely afternoon.